Welcome to toy-polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi. Now recently I picked up a job lot of Action Force and G.I. Joe figures from a Facebook group, and as you can see they have now arrived, and this is the sort of best selection of those bits that I picked up. I got 8 figures and a load of other parts, and I thought today I would try and restore at least one of these figures, because as you can see most of them are in reasonable condition, but poor old Maverick here is a little bit battered and worn. Some child at some point has really given him a good go with what looks to be acrylic paint, I would say, and has sort of painted him in a camouflage. So I think I want to see if I can restore him back to how he was originally. The lot of figures I picked up is not a bad lot actually. I got Lamprey there, Crankcase, Iceberg, Slipstream, we've got Blizzard, obviously we've got Maverick here from the Battle Force 2000 sort of selection, and then there are 2 Action Force figures. We've got a SAS Trooper and an SAS Commando. Now these are obviously the British release. Unlike a lot of the sort of the American G.I. Joes, which have lots and lots of articulation, the Action Force figures are very limited in their articulation, much more like Star Wars figures, but these really do match the predecessors of these, which are Action Man. So one of my favourite Action Man outfits is the SAS outfit, and this is a pretty good sort of little mini version of it. But really what I want to do today is let's try and fix Maverick, because I think he is going to be quite interesting to try and save. I'm sure he can be saved. I know he's not the most rare of figures, but sometimes it's nice just to be able to save something like this and try and get it looking, well, as good as new. So let's have a go and see what we can do with poor old Maverick. So here we have Maverick, and we take a closer look at him. The actual figure itself seems in pretty reasonable condition. There's no broken bits on it. His thumbs aren't broken, and actually his O-ring isn't broken, although it is a little bit sort of rotted out. And I think all of the figures here have pretty rotted out O-rings, which is fine because I have a whole bag of them to swap them out while I'm working on this one. The main problem with this guy is obviously he has been painted. Now I said I think this is acrylic paint. Underneath I would say the paint is probably reasonable. You can just about see some of the sort of silver bits there through here, through the sort of the acrylic paint, but this is gone sort of quite far. Actually those boots don't look like they've been painted. He's sort of been painted up to there. So the first thing we're going to do is actually take him apart, so we can take off his helmet and see what that looks like underneath. That's pretty stiff. Oh, that's good. His face hasn't been painted. That's in reasonable condition. But as you can see here, this helmet's supposed to be completely blue and it's just been painted brown. So I'm going to put that in one little pot. Then I've got a screwdriver here so we can undo the back of him. And we'll keep the screw into one pot there, and then we can pull the rest of him apart. And I'm going to basically put in the pot on the right all the pieces that need some work doing to them. So that you can see is all painted. That is all painted. The head I think I'm going to leave. There doesn't seem to be much needs doing to that. Then we've got the body too. Both sides of that need some work. We can take this off. Obviously the pelvis needs work, and then the legs as well. I think just going to take everything apart on this so that we've got it all down to its individual pieces, and then we can start seeing if we can try and clean this up at all. So let's get both of those screws out. Like so, and then we'll prise these legs apart. As I say, the actual figure seems in pretty good condition. It doesn't look like he's been played with much apart from being painted, so I'm not quite sure why this would have happened. I know I sort of painted toys as a child. I guess someone's got bored at some point or thought that they wanted, rather than having a figure all in white, they wanted something in camouflage, and Maverick was the guy that had that job done to him. So there we go, we've got him all into his basic parts, and now we can try and clean off this paint and see what we can do to get him looking as good as new. Now if you've watched any of my previous videos on saving action figures, I've done a video on restoring a vintage Mattel Cylon, and I've also done a video on restoring a vintage Action Man, both of which have been painted with sort of paints. I think the Cylon had been painted with some sort of enamelled blue paint, and the Action Man, really have no idea what he was painted with, but he was absolutely covered in red paint. And to get that off I've used brake fluid. So you can see here this is some .4 brake and clutch fluid. You can pick this up at most sort of car shops. This came from Halfords. It only costs a few pounds for a bottle, and you can use it over and over again. So what I want to try on this is just to see if it will actually work on this sort of paint. I don't think I've ever done, I think this is acrylic paints, so I'm going to test it on this hat or this helmet, because it's not actually painted apart from the acrylic paint that's been put on top of it. There's no sort of paint underneath it. It should just be blue plastic. Obviously some of these other parts have, you know, this one's got some silver paint on it that has been painted over. So I want to see how well this acrylic paint is removed using the .4 brake fluid. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else, but to start with we're going to just give a test on this. And I'd always recommend doing tests before you go onto the whole figure in case something goes horribly wrong, and I think this is just a good part to test on. So what I've got is a plastic pot here, and into that I'm going to pour in the brake fluid. Now this brake fluid should be a sort of yellowy colour, but as you can see this is quite a nasty red now, and that's because the last time I used it was for my Action Man, and the red paint that came off that has really quite stained this brake fluid. But it should make no difference to how it works, and it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day it's going to have all sorts of brown and green paint left in it now. So I'm just going to drop this into the brake fluid, and we'll leave that for an hour or so and then see what happens. Hopefully we should be able to start to wipe the paint off, but it takes about an hour for it to work. You've just got to be patient, and if that works we'll try it on some other pieces. And while I'm waiting for the brake fluid to do its job, I'm going to sit and replace all the O-rings on these figures, because I say they're all a little bit rotten and sort of on the edge of going. So I have a whole pile of little O-rings here. If you want to replace them yourself, then the O-rings you need are slightly over 1 centimetre in diameter. I'd say these are 1.4 centimetres in diameter, and they should do the job perfectly. So I'll just get started and get all of these fixed up. Well, it's been a little while now. We can just have a go and see if this has made any difference to the paint on Maverick's blue helmet here. So I'm just going to take that out, drip off any of the excess, and you can see it looks like it's started to sort of shift a little bit. So I'm just going to get a bit of this kitchen towel and we'll rub it a bit. And it's certainly started to loosen it up. You can see it's made quite a difference there. It's already coming off. Now I have a toothbrush here. This is just an old toothbrush, and sometimes these are good to just sort of rough the surface up a little bit and start getting the paint to shift a bit. Normally with this brake fluid. It takes a few goes. You just have to leave it to soak for a fairly long time. And if you've got any awkward areas, you can see here that on Maverick's helmet he's got quite a lot of little sort of tiny areas on the edges where things are going to get caught. Just use, this is a cocktail stick, a nice wooden cocktail stick, and you can use that to sort of rub into the grooves there, and that will start shifting the paint as well. So I think this is going to work. It needs a lot longer to sort of soak, but you can see that the process is happening, and I'm starting to be able to remove this paint, and it's coming off reasonably well. So I think I'm just going to risk the rest of Maverick and stick all of him in this brake fluid and let it soak. The worst case is that the paint underneath will start to come off and I'll just have to repaint the whole figure, but I'm sort of hopeful that that won't happen. But you can see that that is starting to make a difference, and really once it starts it does come off quite easily. So I think yeah, let's just stick all of Maverick in this brake fluid. So I'm going to put the helmet back in. Here are all the pieces, every piece that needs work, and we'll dunk all of that into the brake fluid, and I'm going to leave that for a good while now, and then we'll come and see if I can get any more of that paint to sort of shift away. It's now been another hour, so I thought I'd give the helmet one more go and see how the paint's coming on, if it's loosened any more. It does look like it has. It's certainly starting to shift a lot easier. With this sort of paint removal, it really is patience. You just have to sort of do a bit, wait, do a bit, and it will slowly start to come off. You can see I'm just using a toothpick here just to sort of scratch the surface of the paint. This isn't damaging the plastic at all, it's just sort of shifting the paint off the top of it. I think that is starting to make quite a difference. The more paint I get off, and then I'll sort of put it back in and leave it again for another hour. But you can see it really is starting to shift quite nicely. You can see that that's actually, you know, you can see a lot of the blue of the original plastic now. Oh, that's making quite a big difference. So I think one thing I will do now is actually go and give this a good wash just in some hot soapy water. So I'll rub as much of this paint off as I can, and I'll wash it in hot soapy water to shift some more, using a toothbrush as well to sort of try and shift some of the bits that are harder to reach, and then I'll put it back in. But you can see that it really is making quite a big difference, and yeah, it's really starting to come out quite nicely. I think we'll end up with this figure looking really good. It's going to be a labour of love, but it will end up looking very nice. So there's that helmet done. Let's try one of the other bits of the body. So I'll just put that to one side, and I'll pull out a bit of the torso if I can get a piece of the torso. So there we have a piece of the torso. Let's just give this a rub. Oh yeah, that is making a remarkable difference. And you can see actually underneath that the silver paint and the green paint isn't being affected. The factory applied paints seem to work in a different way to the sort of acrylic paints that you can buy from the shops. So they seem to stick a lot better, and the brake fluid doesn't seem to break it down at all, which is great news. Yeah, you can see that's actually cleaned up already. There's quite a lot of it that's been removed. I can just let's scrape off some of these little bits off the side. Yeah, that is a big difference. Oh well, it looks like this first round then I'm going to just carry on cleaning all of these bits up. Try and get as much off as I can, and I'll put them back in for another hour. But you can see that is actually starting to look reasonably clean. It actually looks like it's going to be salvageable. So yeah, I'll just clean these bits off camera, and then we'll dunk them in again. Well, here are the bits after giving them a good clean in some hot soapy water, and I would have to say about 90% of the paint has come off. If we look at the body sections here, you can see these are looking really nice. There's a tiny little bit of green paint left there. That's in the sort of moulding sort of little hole, you know, where the bits are cut off the sprues. There's a little bit of green in there that I can't get out, but everything else seems pretty sort of clean, if you ask me. There's another little green hole there, it's a moulding mark. I might just cut that out with a knife, but everything else is looking good. Again, if we get to the pelvis, there's a few tiny little green bits left in this sort of silver paint here, which should just sort of come off if I sort of scratch them a bit. They're just in the sort of fine details, but otherwise it's all clean. The boots only had a little bit of paint on the top. As you can see, those are now nice and white again, as are the lower legs. These are looking pretty good. There's a few tiny little marks where the sort of copyright information is printed on the legs. You can see there's tiny little bits of paint just in some of the letters, which again I might just be able to sort of chip out with a very fine knife. The worst bits though are still the helmet. You can see this has got bits left of the brown paint on it, and also the arms. These are proving quite hard to get the paint off, especially around the hands. Now I think that's because there's a lot of details in the hands and the paint tends to pool in all of these details, so the paint is much thicker. So I'm going to put the arms and the helmet back in the brake fluid for another couple of hours and just let it soak in. I reckon by that time that's done, we should be able to get rid of all of the paint. But overall it's a remarkable sort of change from what it was. You can see that this figure is now looking pretty white again, and even if I left it as is, it would certainly look a lot better. But I reckon just a few more hours of soaking this in the brake fluid and that will shift completely. So let's do this again and we'll come back to it and see if we can get those last little bits of paint out. After a second round in the brake fluid, you can see I was actually able to remove a whole lot more of the brown paint. There's a few tiny little bits left on the helmet where it's sort of really caught in some very hard to reach areas, and likewise on the arms it's just sort of in some little sort of nooks and crannies that you've got a little bit of the brown paint left and a slight sort of stain into the plastic. But overall I'm really quite pleased with how well the paint has come off. As you can see, some of the paint on the gloves did get a bit damaged, so I'm just going to retouch that because I think with a tiny little bit of paint on top of that, that should look a lot nicer, and Maverick is looking a whole lot better than he did when he started. So let's just touch up the paint on these hands and then we'll class that figure as done. Now normally I use Humbrol acrylics to paint my figures, but I wasn't actually able to get a blue that matches the blue of this Maverick figure. In fact, the shop I normally go to was shut, so I just picked up some other acrylic paint from an art shop. Now this is not the same stuff I use, but it's a very good colour match. This is azure blue, so I'm just going to use that to sort of do an undercoat, and then to give it a nice sort of not sort of gloss finish but sort of satiny finishes, which is what the original paint has. I've also got this, which is a clear acrylic top coat. Now this gives a sort of semi-gloss, semi-satin sort of top coat to it. It is clear, although actually when you open up the tub of it you'll see it looks white, but when it does dry, it dries completely clear. So I'm going to do the blue undercoat and then just a light coating of this sort of top sort of gloss, slightly satin finish, and I think that will make these gloves that sort of match the originals as close as I can get. So let's do a quick bit of this blue paint and we'll get this figure looking as smart as he did originally. As you can see, that's a fairly good colour match straight out of the pot, so I'm not going to mix it just to for the sake of mixing it. I think this will just match quite nicely as is. The paint has now had time to dry, and this is the end result for Maverick. As you can see, he's actually turned into a pretty nice looking figure. There's still a few little sort of stains on the lighter coloured plastic here, you can just see around the elbows, but otherwise he is looking really nice. The finished paint on the hands, so you can see, is actually a very good match for the original. It may be just a slight tad lighter, but the actual sort of sheen that I've managed to get using the top coat has really sort of finished it off nicely. You can see it does match the sort of sort of belt tops and the little pockets on the side there. So really, I'm very pleased with how that's come out. Now, a lot of people say it's probably not worth restoring a figure like that, but for me it is, because I get a great deal of enjoyment of taking something that otherwise most people would have just sort of chucked in the bin and giving it sort of a new lease of life. And I think it is worth the effort. It's only taken me possibly half a day really in time, sort of spread over a couple of days, to get this guy looking good, and he's certainly going to be able to go on display here at toy-polloi, so it really was worth the effort. So I hope this video has been of interest to you, and thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
Obviously he has been painted. Now, I said I think this is acrylic paint. Underneath, it's very hard to tell how he... Bless you. I'll record that bit again.